Hi, this is Praios and I'm a professional gambler. Today we will learn how to crush underbluffers, so people who are not bluffing enough. We will learn with the help of Phil Galfond. Before we get into his video, I have a guess already. If these dudes bet a lot, we need to fold a lot. Yeah, that's probably the adjustment because they don't bluff enough. So the marginal hands we can more easy let go, and even some value hands that could be call downs against others, maybe folds against them. But let's see Phil's thoughts, and maybe he has some very good tips that we can use in our game as well. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hey everybody, Phil here. Today I want to talk about how to adjust to somebody who's not bluffing rivers enough. There are some obvious adjustments that you probably already are thinking of, but actually there are spots on not just the river, but on the turn and flop as well, where you can make adjustments. And also talk about one specific leak that I see in almost everybody that I talk to about poker with regards to check raise bluffing the river, or bluff raising the river in general. So what's the most obvious?
Yeah, I think bluff raises on the turn, on the river, often are not happening often enough. And yeah, that's probably the leak he's talking about. Another common leak is one and done. So people make the continuation bet and give up on the turn a lot. And this is very common leak on mid stakes at least.
Adjustment when somebody's not bluffing river enough. It's if you're facing a river bet and you have a hand that should sometimes call and sometimes fold, or even a hand that should usually call or maybe always call, but only beats a bluff, you should fold. The way that poker works in theory is, your opponent's supposed to bluff a certain frequency based on the bet size and the pot size. And then you're supposed to defend a certain frequency based on that. However, if your opponent is bluffing 3% less often than they should, now all of a sudden the correct counter strategy, assuming they're not going to readjust, is to just fold everything, all of your bluff catchers, because now your opponent's not bluffing enough. Your calls are all going to be losing money on average. So that's the simple way to go about it. The only point that I really want to hammer home there is, don't feel obligated to call with hands that are supposed to be a call against somebody who's just bluffing half as much.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think so many people don't get this nowadays. People are only thinking in terms of GTO and not being exploitable, but in reality, nobody plays close to GTO, and that's why we need to use an exploitative approach way more often than play GTO, and this means we can adjust to our opponent's tendencies, and if he's just under bluffing, for example, we should fold more, or if he's bluffing too much, we can call with more hands. Basically all the things that beat his bluffs. So yeah, there are adjustments that a lot of people don't make anymore. People just hammer hands into the solvers and then go with the solution of the solver, but this is obviously not correct against many opponents. Or for example, if someone is never 3-betting, you can basically always put him on the nuts or close to the nuts. You should adjust accordingly and not still stick to the GTO preflop ranges. Okay, continuing.
Much as they should. So let's get into some of the more interesting adjustments. So starting on the river, which is kind of closer to the obvious place to make adjustments, and then we're gonna backtrack.
I think river also the people have the most leaks, and river is played a lot more honest than the streets before. Yeah, some high stakes crushers might not have this leak, but yeah, on mid stakes this is also very common.
To the turn as well. So I'm going to give you just an example board. So let's say that we face a button open, we call in the big blind with king 4 of diamonds, and the flop is king 10-8 with 2 spades. Check, our opponent c-bets, we call. He c-bets small. Turn is a 4 offsuit, giving us 2 pair. We check, our opponent checks. And now river is a 10, pairing the 10 on the flop and counterfeiting our 2 pair. So this is normally a spot where you would want to check call because in addition to having a weak kicker with your king, and in addition to the 10 coming on the river, which could give your opponent trips, you also block the 4, which is a...
I also think that this is actually a very good spot to check raise, because you are blocking many full houses, and yeah, your hand just got counterfeited, and hands like king jack, king queen, ace king now beat you. But if you check raise on the river, this often looks very strong, and you might get these hands to fold. I mean, if someone thinks that you are weak and under bluffing, they might even fold a 10.
Hand that could potentially call you. However, against an opponent who doesn't bluff enough, a lot of the value in checking this hand comes from, first of all, inducing bluffs. You check, your opponent bluffs, you call.
Yeah, actually, my argumentation maybe was not that great, because at least ace king should bet turn. King jack could check. King queen might occasionally, but also bets most of the time. So you should not be up against these type of hands that often. But you also, what you could also do, what was the action? I think you defended the big blind. What was it? Let's go back. Sorry, a bit.
Want to check call because is king 10-8 with 2 spades. Check.
So,
we call in the big blind with king
okay,
4
we have
diamonds.
the big blind.
And the flop is king 10-8 with 2 spades. Check. Our opponent c-bets. We call. He c-bets small. Turn is a 4 offsuit, giving us 2 pair. We check. Our opponent checks. And now river is a 10, pairing the 10 on the flop. And
yeah, I still think that this is a hand that you could use as a bluff, as you need to have bluffs as well as value raises. And this is a perfect candidate, as he's having good blockers. And some weak opponents might even fold trips. And yeah, if for some reason someone check back king jack, then you are getting him to fold. Or, I mean, he raised from the button, so he can have a lot of kings. We could also push him off a split pot. So yeah, it could make sense to raise river. And yeah, as already explained, looks very strong. You are in the big blind. You have all the king 10s, 8 10s and stuff. Yeah, he has these hands in his range as well, and I expect him to call. But yeah, he could also fold something stronger than yours, or a split pot.
And counterfeiting our 2 pair. So this is normally a spot where you would want to check call because in addition to having...
Yeah, I mean, against someone who's bluffing enough, check call is also great, as all the open-ender gut shots and things didn't get there. Flush draw didn't get there, so there should be enough things that he could consider bluffing with.
A weak kicker with your king, and in addition to the 10 coming on the river, which could give your opponent trips. You also block the 4, which is a hand that could potentially call you. However, against an opponent who doesn't bluff enough, a lot of the value in checking this hand comes from, first of all, inducing bluffs. You check, your opponent bluffs, you call, and you block 2 pairs. So you block showdown value, you block hands that can value bet, and you block hands that would never bluff, but you unblock bluffs. But the second thing is, you know, if you bet small on the river, or even bet larger on the river, you run the risk of facing a raise by a hand like a 10, which your opponent can rep very credibly. The thing is, when you're playing against somebody who doesn't bluff nearly enough, you don't really have to be worried about getting raised by a 10 because you can just fold. Now, if your opponent is bluffing almost enough, you should still fold to the raise, but you have to be a little more careful because, let's say you bet small here. Maybe they're not bluff raising quite enough, but they're still going to bluff raise.
So Phil is suggesting that we bet to extract to value. Is this what he's saying?
You can just fold. Now, when you're playing against somebody who doesn't bluff nearly enough, you don't really have to be worried about getting raised by a 10 because you can just fold. Now, if your opponent is bluffing almost enough, you should still fold to the raise, but you have to be a little more careful because, let's say you bet small here. Maybe they're not bluff raising quite enough, but they're still going to bluff raise sometimes, and with hands that you know you had beat that you're then going to fold to. But if they're really under bluffing, and especially for raises, going ahead and betting is low risk. The other thing is if they're almost bluffing enough, now the check call is like kind of okay. They could value bet.
Yeah, I mean, he is probably right. I mean, in no limit hold'em, people don't bet that often. I mean, it's not a donk here because he checked back, but yeah, this is the standard. This is also an example where I was, not finding the correct play because I was sort of, imprisoned in my thinking of the standard play. But in reality, against someone who's really, really under bluffing, it's probably best to just bet full to raise and be able to extract some value, maybe from an 8 and from something like queens, kings, oh, not kings, queens, jacks. Yeah, what else? Because you look as if you are full of shit because you could have all these gutshot type hands. I mean, you could even call with, find a hero call with like ace jack, ace queen. Yeah. Yeah, good advice from Phil. Yeah. So we already learned something. We have to think outside the box, definitely. That's also very important to become not only a good, but a great poker player.
A chop, so you don't necessarily need to check fold. Then you'll induce some bluffs. But against a player who is just clearly not bluffing enough, both for the bet when check two and for a raise when facing a small bet, you should just always small bet this hand and try to get a little bit of value against ace queen, thinking you missed a draw, against pocket nines, whatever they may have that decided to c bet the flop and check back turn. Just go for a little bit of value, and that's going to be the way to take advantage of them. Besides just folding when you have a bluff catcher. In addition to skipping those value check raises with hands like ace 10, you actually want to skip check raise bluffs. And this is something I could talk for a while about. It's something that a lot of people mess up. I want to get back to it a little bit later.
He's right. I mean, if you check raise bluff people, you often get him to fold. I mean, a big part of his folding range are not only his thin value bets, but also his bluffs. And this portion of his range gets very, very diminished. And yeah, therefore you will have way less fold equity against people on the river who are under bluffing.
But first I want to talk about turns and actually flop play as well. I think as you get further removed from the node in the game tree that we're talking about, where there's a leak, which is that your opponent is not bluffing river enough, the adjustments get less obvious. So I want to talk now about turn adjustments. We'll go with the example of Jack 10-6 with a flush draw, and then a 5 of clubs bringing 2 flush draws. So let's say we are in late position, early position raises, we call, and our opponent bets twice. They see bet flop and they see bet turn. Well, now against somebody who is playing a normal range, a hand like ace 10 is in, like ace 10 off is in pretty rough shape because you lose to all their value bets, all their semi bluffs are going to have reasonable equity, and the board is going to get scarier on the river pretty often, and you're going to end up folding the best hand sometimes. But against somebody who doesn't bluff enough, I should specify, doesn't bluff enough on river, hand like ace 10 goes up in value quite a bit. Of course, if they just don't even semi bluff on the turn, well, now ace 10 is just a bad call, regardless of how.
Yeah, correct. If someone is quite honest on the river, ace 10 is now a way better call because yeah, you can expect him to be very honest on the river. You can just fold if he bets again and probably get to showdown against hard draws, club draws, open enders and stuff when he misses, because yeah, he's under bluffing per definition, and therefore we have not that much fear of a 3-barrel bluff. Yeah, great. Hey, he's really analyzing this very well, I have to admit. Well done, Phil.
They play the river because they just have too much value. But if they semi-bluff hands that they should, they're betting some ace queen and some king queen and some flush draws. But once the river hits and they brick, they're just going to check fold. Now a hand like ace 10 goes up in value. Other hands that do very well against somebody who bluffs enough rivers are like big draws. So queen 9 of clubs on this board where there's a club flush draw on the flop, let's say. Because in addition to being able to hit your draw and make money with a bet, you also might get bluffed into once you hit your draw. Then you can raise or call depending on which draw you hit and how scary the board got. Those hands go down in value a lot. Now queen 9 of clubs, for example, on this board, I'm never folding anyways. But some other flush draws against a really big bet, you might shy away from continuing with. There's kind of a double-edged sword in that if they're not going to bluff, let's say on a brick river, now when you call turn with, I don't know, 7-8, they're going to sometimes check to you with hands that would have bluffed and now check fold. But they also might just be checking a lot of pairs to pick off a bluff when all those draws miss. So I wouldn't say those necessarily go up in value. In spots where you're normally going to...
I mean, 7-8 probably is not the best example because you also have so many perceived outs.
be like you have a dicey call on the turn with a made hand that is not going to improve very often. Is going to be in an uncomfortable spot on a lot of rivers. Against somebody who's not going to bluff rivers very often, you can now comfortably call those hands and then comfortably fold the river. But knowing that very often the river's going to go check, check, and you're going to win. The same is true in spots where you might want to value bet yourself. So let's say flop is, let's say that cutoff opens, you call in the big blind with ace-4 of diamonds, and the flop is ace-queen-3. You check, they check back. And let's say now the turn is a 9, bringing a flush draw. So ace-queen-3, 9. Rainbow flop, turn brings a flush draw. This is a pretty good check call hand normally. And part of the reason is that when you bet and the river changes the board, now your value bet's kind of thin. You could potentially get bluff raised. Also, if you check river, you're going to be in a dicey spot where they can go for value with anything better than your hand. And especially if some draws complete, again, you get in dicey spots. But against somebody who's not going to bluff river, just go ahead and take your value on the turn, bet the turn. And then if the river is really safe, you can go for a small value bet. If the river is really not safe, if it's a really scary river, just check. They're not going to turn their bottom pair into a bluff on a scary river, or they're not going to turn whatever their king high plus gut shot that missed.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Not much to add there.
Into a bluff on a scary river because they just don't bluff enough. So now actually, in addition to being able to fold the river, the fact that you can comfortably fold that river and that you're not going to face the bet as often means that you can now value bet the turn with hands that otherwise couldn't. And then if you want to step back all the way to the flop, it's actually kind of the same adjustments you would make on the turn. So sometimes, let's say late position opens, you call in the big blind with king 10, and the flop is 10-9-4 with 2 spades. And you're relatively deep. So this is a hand that, maybe you could check raise, maybe you could check call. Against somebody who's not going to bluff rivers often enough, like part of the reason you don't check raise this hand is because you're inflating the pot, and then the turn and the river are often going to be scary for your actual hand, and you're going to be put in some difficult spots. But if you're up against somebody who's not going
to... Yeah, I would probably not check the raise in this hand too often to keep the pot under control.
To put you in those difficult spots, now you can go for that value raise right away on the flop with king 10. And, if the turn's a jack of spades, just check. And, maybe you check call, maybe you check fold, depending on how much they bet. But just know that you're going to safely be able to check fold river. You're not going to face as many river bluffs. And therefore, you can go for more value now without fearing the consequences.
What about just betting into him? I mean, that's also, this is very unconventional, but doesn't seem too bad if you just want to approach things from a very exploitable standpoint. He's probably not going to raise his draw, the described opponent. You extract value. You also don't allow him to take free cards on the turn because you bet again on a blank. And yeah, on the river you can either value bet or check if it's too scary by then act accordingly to a bet, because yeah, he's under bluffing a lot, so you might be still able to fold against the described very heavy under bluffer.
Repercussions of the board getting dicier for you. So now that we've covered flops and turns as well as most of river play, I want to talk a little bit more about bluff raising river against people who don't bluff enough, because I think it's something that everybody messes up for the most part.
I think bluff raising river in general was messed up by many people, and yeah, they don't often, and they don't do it often enough and with the correct frequencies.
Not just in the way that they play, but conceptually. So on that same board, you might normally check raise a hand like ace 10 or 10-8 or 4, what have you. Against an opponent who's not bluffing nearly enough, well, now they didn't bet the turn, so they don't have a lot of, ace, king, king, queen.
I also would love if he did some more PLO hands instead of no limit hold'em. It seems like with this theory format, he's using no limit hold'em most of the time, although he's a PLO player primarily, so I don't get this fully, but yeah. Well, he could mix it up, though, do like half NL, half PLO hands.
When you check river, they're not going to have a lot of value bets when you block the 10 especially, and they're not going to bluff. So you're not inducing a lot of river bets. You're much better off just going for value yourself. So you actually, against somebody who doesn't bluff that much, when you're out of position, you just don't go for many check raises for value. And you also don't go for many check raises as a bluff. This is a concept that I think a lot of people really struggle with. And it's when you're making a check raise bluff on the river, yes, you are targeting their value bets, their thinner value bets. You're trying to make their value bets fold. However, if let's say you check and you're facing a pot size bet, they're supposed to be bluffing 1/3 of the time. And then when you check raise to whatever amount, let's say you're risking, like you're laying yourself 1-1, which is a small check raise, but let's just say you are. They need to fold half the time and call half the time, which actually means they're going to fold all 33% of their bluffs. So they only need to fold another 17% of hands of their 67% value bets. So now they actually have to call most of their value bets when you're making a small raise there. Now, in that same scenario, if they have 10% bluffs instead of 33, well, now they fold those 10% bluffs, and now they have to fold 40 out of their 90% value bets. They have to fold a lot more of their value bets. So actually, going for check raise bluffs against people who are way under bluffing can often be very expensive, because part of the value and part of the expected value of check raise bluffing is that you're getting bluffs to fold, as well as.
Are we needing a table to explain this even better? I think we need. I think I saw a very good website lately, and we'll just use this one. It's called a whiteboard. So let's see if we can build this. So normal opponent has this value range, and let's make the part of his bluffs red. Now you play against the under bluffer. He is having still this. He's only bluffing a very small amount and has still the same value range than before. And if you now try to bluff him, he probably still has the same threshold to call than the other guy. So let's say this is a threshold. So people are, if you are bluffing, are folding this part. Or this is a balanced, good player who does it right, and this is a guy who is under bluffing. Why is it not automatically making this a circle? Whatever. You get the point. He is folding like double the hands like the second guy. And that's why it's a bad idea to check raise bluff a lot against this dude, because this pretty quickly turns minus EV as he's simply not folding enough. So I guess that's what Phil is trying to explain.
Their value hands to fold. So keep that in mind. I think some people make the opposite adjustment and they think, well, I'd normally call with this hand, but this guy's never bluffing, so I can't call, but maybe I can check raise and make him fold a pair. The people that you can't call against are also people that you shouldn't be bluff raising very often, unless of course they have another character trait, which is that they way overfold to raises, right? So on that same board, skip the check raises with 10x and skip the check raise bluffs. So you just end up against somebody who's not bluffing that much. You end up doing a lot of the betting yourself because they're not doing the betting for you. So to sum up, you can make some pretty obvious river decisions. I'm sure you know what to do there. And not just with facing bets, but in anticipation of facing bets, you can plan differently. But that plan doesn't need to start on the river. It can start on the turn, or it can even start on the flop. And you can start playing value hands more aggressively, knowing that you're not going to get blown off of them if the board gets scary. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Good luck at the tables against all those under.
This was helpful. I mean, we learned a bit. You need to think more outside the box and don't stick with the autoplay or the standard play against people who have suboptimal ranges. And yeah, even I fell into the trap, as I thought, okay, we had to check this hand. But yeah, he made a great example where you could bet the king instead of going for a check call, which might be too thin against the described opponent. Yeah, loved the video. I hope you also liked it, and also my remarks. Yeah, like, subscribe, share, all the good things. And also consider to check out my second channel. It's called Finance with Axel. If you are interested in cryptocurrency, investing, money, this is a good place to be. Yeah. Again, thanks for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.